From Volk's upcoming title unification bout against Yair Rodriguez set for UFC 290, to finalizing a fight against Conor McGregor after heated trash talk on Twitter, here's why we need to see Alexander Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev rematch. For starters, Alexander is gearing up to put his featherweight championship on the line once again during the UFC's International Fight Week. And rumor has it, Volk's gonna face off against the interim champ. And the fight is in the works for UFC 290, which is set to take place on July 8, 2023 at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Even though the deal hasn't gone beyond verbal agreements for now, we all know Volk's gonna enter the octagon in unfamiliar territory. For one, he's coming off a loss right after dropping a close decision to lightweight champion Islam Makhachev at UFC 284 in February 2023. Although back in 2022, Volkanovski defeated Max Holloway for the third time at UFC 276, which was pretty much the highlight of International Fight Week. As for Rodriguez, he's entering the bout with 2 back-to-back victories and a lot of confidence. In his fight at UFC 284, he stopped Josh Emmett thanks to a second-round submission to claim the interim featherweight title win. Now, I gotta admit, Volk came painfully close to becoming a double champ in February 2023. In a fight, many fans thought he should have won, and he would have if the 5th round was at least 20 seconds longer. That said, this is exactly why a rematch offer is on the table. But even though he's eager to run it back at lightweight, Volk needs to go back down and defend his title at featherweight first. For both fighters, it's going to be just under 5 months out of the cage since their bouts at UFC 284, so they are pumped. And even though there are hardly any official betting odds yet, Volk's definitely entering the fight as the favorite one out of the two. I mean, the man's literally holding on to the featherweight title since December 2019, and he's defended it 4 times, hoping it to make it 5. But as the fight comes closer, fans are hoping he'll wrap it up soon enough to kickstart talks of a rematch with Islam, the same offer that's been through one heck of a roller coaster over the past few months. You see, because of the super close and debated result at UFC 284, both fighters were ready for an immediate rematch. They were even going through the details backstage, right after their 5-rounder, finalizing a potential Part 2 in Abu Dhabi. And like the major chunk of fans who saw the fight, UFC President Dana White was also on board with a rematch. But here's the thing, he's not ready to jump into it yet, especially with Yair's huge win against Emmett at the co-main event. According to White, he's calling the Makhachev versus Volkanovski bout a super fight that's already given the best it could. I mean, when the entire world's arguing over the real winner, that's the kind of super fight that delivers. And White claims the only thing that could possibly be better than that is if the guy who's fighting for the interim title comes out of this looking great, too. And that's exactly why he set up the Yair versus Alexander fight. As for Islam, White's pressing pause on his fights while he's considering other options for him. Not to mention, White's not the only one who's reluctant over the fight. Even Daniel Cormier doesn't want to see an immediate rematch. In fact, he believes that both Islam and Volkanovski need to focus on their own divisions right now. Not only that, but Cormier also claims Volk owes it to Yair to give him an opportunity to at least try and become the undisputed champion of the world. Think about it. Beating Charles Oliveira means that Beneil Dariush isn't going to get a chance to fight for the lightweight championship of the world, which is exactly what happens in super fights. You get a close super fight, and suddenly fans are desperate to see the action again. But maybe it's better to have champions stick to their divisions just to clear things up a bit. To top it off, Cormier scored the fight in favor of Islam, claiming Volk fell short, and that cost him his #1 spot in the official UFC pound-for-pound rankings. That said, let's not forget how he made his way to the top, even when he seemed like the underdog. I mean, he's always been the shortest guy out there, and that's exactly how his opponents underestimated him every single time. Talking about his transition from his rugby league days to MMA, Volk didn't take up Islam as a huge competition, knowing that being the shortest one didn't matter anymore. And as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, he knew he didn't have to prove anything. Sure, his opponents are always smirking at first glance, but he's always proved them wrong. If you want to understand Alexander, you gotta go beyond his ability and deep dive into his character, with a few can't-miss fights, like his first 3 duels against UFC fan favorite Max Holloway. Volkanovski beat the Hawaiian in December 2019 to claim the featherweight title thanks to unanimous decision, only to defeat him again 7 months later. Although this was a more controversial win, especially when White called it in Holloway's favor. And even though a little debate isn't the end of the world in a sport like this, having his unbeaten record disputed didn't sit well with the Australian, so he did something he didn't have to. He offered a second rematch to settle the score, and as expected, he put all doubt to rest, beating the fighter most fans considered a shoo-in for the UFC Hall of Fame. And that's just the beginning of how Volk went on to display his undeniable talent, right until his fight against American Brian Ortega. And I'm talking about round 4. It was when the jiu-jitsu specialist known for his submissions managed to put the Australian into a guillotine choke, which for the UFC newbies is literally a brutal chokehold, and you can just consider it an instant defeat at that point. So, imagine making his way out of something like that, staying resilient and composed, even if the lights were dimming, gasping for air. It's the sort of game-changing moment Volk is known for. That said, a win against Makhachev would have given him a chance to cement his legacy. But it seems like Volk's not over that either. Just because he's gearing up for a fight against Yair, it doesn't mean he doesn't have his eyes on a rematch with Makhachev. If there's one thing on his mind right now, it's that he wants to capture and defend both belts. So if he manages to beat Yair, which if I'm being honest is pretty likely the case, Volk is gonna jump into another fight with Makhachev, claiming 2 belts. But let's not forget how the UFC has been reluctant to allow dual division champions to hang on to both belts for long, which is why title fights in one division or the other tend to slow down. But Alexander claims it's not gonna happen with him. Having said that, he's gearing up for another epic fight that's got fans hyped. He's finalizing a fight against Conor McGregor after heated trash talk on Twitter. Yep, all that back and forth wasn't for nothing. Although right now, Conor is expected to fight against Michael Chandler, especially after his most recent coaching stint on The Ultimate Fighter. But that doesn't mean he's not open to a bigger fight against Volk. In fact, it all started when ESPN MMA posted a tweet suggesting the 2 fighters were going to face off at featherweight. And as expected, Alexander was ready to make this fight happen. As for Conor, he responded with a bunch of tweets taunting his potential opponent, claiming the Australian fighter has to stick with weighing scales to compete against him. And if you really think about it, Conor isn't wrong either. But Alexander wasn't going to step back either, and replied claiming he's ready for a fight, anytime, anywhere, any weight. And from there, the Irishman fired some shots back, and neither of them were ready to back down. Now, I gotta admit, it might seem like it's not gonna happen with all the other fights lined up for Conor and Alexander. To top it off, Conor's been focusing on his documentary and The Ultimate Fighter after an injury hiatus that started in 2021. On the other hand, Volk needs to grab a win against Yair and settle his rematch with Islam first. Are the 2 fighters gonna be able to wrap it up on time? I guess we'll have to wait and see. Until then, fans are desperately waiting for any updates about potentially witnessing a showdown between the 2 talented athletes inside the octagon. So, there you have it. From finalizing a fight against Conor McGregor after heated trash talk on Twitter, to Volk's upcoming title unification bout for UFC 290 against Yair Rodriguez, that was why we need to see Alexander Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev rematch.